Yeah, and in relation to that, I think you also stress in the book somewhere else that, and maybe it's a characteristic of the digital age, the concentration of capital, that maybe European or UK acts are less of a percentage on the American billboard now than they were even 10 years ago. And that might be an unfortunate development, but but on the other hand, the next chapter is dedicated to Riverdance, creating a kind of showcase for Irish culture to the world. And I think, when I read the chapter and the fact that the show originally was presented for the Eurovision, I was thinking, is Riverdance a bit like the Red Army Choir production, for, the face of the Irish state in a way abroad, because in a way that's what it became. Not really, it became something that it wasn't at the start, basically. I think it was it changed its purpose, and that was something that became very popular in the States, in the USA and worldwide. But anyway, I'd like you to retrace the development of Riverdance, because I think it's a kind of a semi-state, or a semi-state enterprise in Ireland.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. That Riverdance, to an extent, becomes representative of the Irish state abroad. Because people make their impressions of, you know, you famously loved Sean Casey, so you wanted to see where he came from and what inspired him, and you ended up with a life that pivoted because there was an element of Irish culture that was very attractive to you. So I think I love that your notion that Riverdance represents the Irish state, but let's twist that into the enterprise, because I'm looking at the enterprise rather than the music, or the artistic development of these projects. If the enterprise of Riverdance represents the Irish state, the message is that a married mother on a career break who was ambivalent about doing, being the director of the Eurovision Song Contest, was persuaded by her own artistic drive and by the freedom of expression that was given to her by the national broadcaster. So it's an extraordinary story, and I like that idea that it's like the Red Army Choir, that these products then go around the world, and if they're enjoyed by people, if they find an audience, even if it's subliminal, it's going into your collection of impressions of that particular country. But Riverdance came from the mind of a mother who was given an opportunity and took it. And it wasn't that the Eurovision was particularly great that year, or that it was a high point in popular culture, or that anyone who's not a Eurovision obsessive could name, the top 10 artists in that. But the long-term success was Riverdance, which was designed to entertain people while the votes were being tabulated. It was that small an element. And no one thought this is going to be a commercial triumph. This will be one of Ireland's biggest cultural exports. But it was absolutely fueled by Moira Doherty's interest and expertise. We had women in Ireland at that time who had the expertise, who had the vision to come up with something that wasn't just a great way to pass a bit of time while the votes were being collected, but it was the foundation for an incredibly successful economic as well as cultural export. And there were strands that made up Riverdance, and there were parts of expertise that were being gathered by Bill Whelan, who did the music. And don't forget, this wasn't a dance show. Like, most people will think of it as a dance show, but it's a music show with dance. And I think that's really important. And, at Riverdance, the musicians were part of the show. They were visible. They weren't in the orchestra pit, or they weren't on a DAT tape that you press play, and it's just all about the dancers. So it's extraordinary in that music was a major driver of it. That was Moya Doherty and her husband and Bill Whelan together were able to do something that I argue in the book that Disney couldn't have done, that Sony couldn't have done. And if they could, well, why didn't they? If there was a project that could generate over $1 billion, because, according to my calculations now, not all of that would have flowed to Ireland, but it's generated as a cultural product, and any cultural product that generates over $1 billion, it should be studied, should be understood, and the lessons should be learned of it. So the lessons from Riverdance are that without being full-time people devoted to a single project, all the elements of Riverdance were gathered in Ireland, and the show then was able to be exported. And it built up in stages. And a lot of those stages had major jeopardy. And a lot of those stages tell us something about Ireland and the Irish, not from the show, but from the enterprise behind it. When it was eventually released on DVD, no, it was pre-DVD, it was on VHS cassette. And it was a huge selling video cassette. And it was a fundraiser for Rwanda, for aid to Rwanda. Again, if this project had been designed by Sony or Disney, that's not what they would have done when they took it to the market to sell the physical product, the DVD or the VHS. And then there's the question of, okay, it worked really well as a piece of television. Would it work in a different way? And the idea was floated that it would be a special. That let's make it bigger and longer and a bit more, maybe inject a bit of variety into it, and it would be a fabulous Christmas special. But Moya Doherty, the team Doherty and Bill Whelan thought, actually, this could be a live stage show. And they had the expertise again in Ireland because of that flow, that curious flow. I know it's upsetting when our favorite bands don't play in Ireland because they're too busy being acclaimed elsewhere. But visiting bands, the presence of the major labels isn't all bad. Like, I wouldn't want people to read Jim and myself's book and think, okay, local, good, DIY, good, all the other stuff, evil, the evil empire. It's got its benefits if you learn the lessons, if you're studying it. And Riverdance then went from being a live show with a good bit of financial jeopardy when it was put on in the Point Theatre, and it then became an exportable product. And boy, did that work. And, it was so successful that there were eventually 3 groups able to tour and practice. So it's absolutely a cultural idea that became a cultural business that really became a cultural industry. I think that commercialization of Irish dancing, and by the way, the diva in it is Michael Flatley, who decides that he wants more out of it, and then he sets up his own show, and it becomes a duopoly. So out of this woman, a mom, a stay-at-home mom, when she got the offer of doing producing, directing Riverdance, the Eurovision that Riverdance came out of, that 2 huge cultural exports come out of this woman's idea.